The first thing I remember is waking in a haze of rot and humidity, the air thick with the smell of decayed flesh and the faintly living pulse of something foreign. My lungs felt heavy, each breath a borrowed effort, each heartbeat reverberating through my bones like a drum in a tomb. The battlefield, or was it a derelict outpost, lay around me in fragmented chaos. The smoke of burning wreckage twisted into the shadows, carrying whispers that my mind could almost interpret as voices, though they were not voices at all. They were instructions, commands woven into the very air, into the fibers of my body. It was only then, as the fog of unconsciousness lifted, that I realized the warmth beneath my skin. Not a fever, not a simple burn, but a purposeful living heat that moved and pulsed like a second heart. My memory shivered back to the moment of contact. A Tyranid Spore floating like a seed against the weak point in my armor, detonating silently yet explosively and lodging itself deep. The world slowed, muffled, as if I were underwater, my senses betraying me with every flicker of perception. Something was growing inside me, something alien. I argued with myself. It was a toxin, surely. Medikey could handle this. My training kicked in automatically. Check for fever, check vision, monitor veins. But the infection had rhythm. It learned me sync to my heartbeat, anticipating my reactions, pressing against my nerve endings like a memory encoded in flesh. Flashes of previous Tyranid encounters crossed my mind. Those victims had never lasted long, and yet I was still breathing. Or was I? Then came the pain. Needle-like, radiating from my spine and ribs as if my skeleton itself had become a host for something foreign. Panic and humiliation wrestled in my chest. I tried to pray, to recite the catechisms of the Imperium, but the words fled from my mind, obscured by the creeping intelligence of the spore. I understood the purity of the human form, and now I felt every principle of that creed desecrated from within. My body was no longer my own. My flesh had become soil for something else. And then came the whisper. Not a voice, not a language, but a sense, a guidance written in the very synapses of my nervous system. The Tyranid hive mind did not speak. It instructed, directed through instinct and genetic memory. Pheromones encoded as thought. I was not alone. Something other, ancient and alien, cohabited my mind. And the more I felt it, the more I realized the final truth. This spore had planted me, not to destroy me outright, but to cultivate me. I was incubation, soil, a vessel for life that was not mine. A sudden convulsion seized me. My lungs burned, my stomach heaved, and a thick, translucent mucus laced with chitin fragments tore from my body. I could no longer deny it. I was a host, a chamber of growth, an unwilling vessel for a new life. I tried to rise, to resist, to crawl away from this inevitability, but my body collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Then I felt it move, not just growing, but twitching, reaching for existence within me. There was no salvation here, no comfort in the doctrines I had learned, only the inexorable certainty that I was changed, that the spore was writing itself into the essence of my being. Resistance was futile. Fear gave way to a slow, suffocating understanding. I was no longer entirely human. I would never again belong to my kind. And yet in the midst of horror, in the face of what should have been despair, a grim clarity settled over me. I understood my role, even if I could not yet embrace it. I would endure. I would survive. I would become what had been forced upon me, and in some distant, unknowable way perhaps even thrive. For 4 months, the walls around me had been absolute. Metal, cold and unyielding, separated me from the universe I'd once roamed freely. My niece, barely more than a whisper of life, had become my tether to reality, the only warmth in this sterile cage. I could hear the ship hum, feel its vibrations, but for all its grandeur, it was a prison for creatures it did not understand, tools it would never recognize as thinking, as feeling, as alive. Isolation is a slow death for any social species, and we were no exception. Every heartbeat echoed in the emptiness, each pulse a reminder that the world outside was moving without us. Then the red voice came, not with chains or commands, but with gesture and presence. His mechanical face remained unreadable, but his movements spoke volumes. He pointed to a corner where broken equipment sat, waiting for repair, and I understood. He was offering me more than tools. He was offering choice. For the first time since capture, I could act because I wanted it, because survival demanded it, and because my compulsion, the genetic memory of my purpose, would not allow me to do otherwise. I set my niece down carefully, her small hands clutching at mine instinctively, and I began. Broken generators, scorched plasma rifles, melter guns with fouled accelerators. They lay before me like a puzzle that existed to test the boundaries of life and death. My hands moved almost of their own accord, guided by instincts older than any human knowledge, repurposing parts, cannibalizing what was necessary, improving what was possible. Each spark, each hum of energy returning to a dead machine was a triumph against entropy and despair. She watched me, absorbing every motion, learning without instruction. She sorted components, kept the work area meticulous, became a small extension of my will. In her presence, the suffocating loneliness receded. For brief moments, I was not a captive, not a tool, not property. I was family. The work itself became a ritual, each assembly a statement that survival was not only possible, but inevitable if one acted with purpose and care. Then came the breaches, the hollering vacuum of space clawing through torn bulkheads, and the void reaching with invisible talons. The Geller field flickered, the Imperium's protective shroud quivering as if uncertain of its own power. And yet the shield generator I had crafted held. The air remained, our bodies intact, the immediate horror held at bay by ingenuity, instinct, and the barest touch of hope. Humans who had once ignored or feared us now regarded us differently. Eyes wide with awe or disbelief, they recognized the undeniable truth. The creature they had caged was more than a tool. It was salvation. The red voice approached, his servo claw damaged, but his attention absolute. He did not demand, he did not lecture. He simply observed, then adjusted, then offered me more work and more freedom within constraints I had learned to navigate. For the first time, there was recognition in his presence. Not understanding, not empathy, but acknowledgement. The cage was still present, the locks still engaged, but now they were my choice. A subtle nod that trust could exist, even when freedom could not. Every day followed this rhythm. Broken equipment, desperate repairs, small acts of care between niece and me, and the gradual acknowledgement of value from the humans who had once only seen property. I learned their faces, their hesitations, their small gestures of trust. In turn, I taught without words, through demonstration and intervention, bridging the chasm between species with understanding that transcended language. My compulsion drove me, yes, but choice had become a companion to instinct. Work, care, survival, they were no longer imposed, they were chosen. And in this cruel, iron-walled existence, I realized the truth of my life. The galaxy offered no guarantees, no absolution, no safety outside the work that bound me to it. But within the act of building, of improving, of creating what others could not, I had purpose. In the quiet moments between sparks and clanging metal, my niece slept beside me, safe and fed. My hands could repair, could protect, could sustain life in a universe bent on consumption. And even in captivity, even in servitude, I had carved out a fragment of agency, a room, a moment, a heartbeat that belonged entirely to me and to her. The first time they handed me a data slate filled with forbidden patterns, I knew exactly what it meant. Not because I could read their symbols. Many of them were encrypted in the dense ritualistic code of the Mechanicus, but because the moment my skin brushed the device, my instincts reacted. It was the same sensation as touching a living nerve, a pulse, a calling, an invitation to complete what others could only begin. The tech heretic watched me closely, his crimson optics unblinking, waiting to see whether I would understand what he had risked so much to compile. He didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. His presence alone communicated the weight of what he was offering. Knowledge not sanctioned by the Imperium. Designs abandoned as dangerous. Blueprints that bent the rules of physics and faith. Schematics meant to be forgotten. Schematics that could change everything. The first design was a fractured mess. Half-runs, partial diagrams, corrupted formulas. Many hands had tried to decode it before, and all had failed. They had approached the puzzle with logic, reason, structured human thought. But these patterns were alive. They required intuition, not calculation. They needed to be felt, not solved. I traced the broken lines with my finger, and in the back of my mind, a map assembled itself. The missing pieces slotted into place, contours solidifying through instinct more than thought. My niece watched quietly beside me, holding a small diagnostic tool, as if she already knew she would someday take part in this work. Piece by piece, the heretic's forbidden machine emerged in my mind, a device that could amplify natural bioelectricity and stabilize fluctuating energies. Something that should not exist, something the Imperium would purge without hesitation. As I sketched the completed pattern onto scrap parchment he had provided, the red voice leaned closer. For the first time, his mechanical respirator hitched, barely audible, but unmistakable. A gasp. Awe, not fear, the kind of reverence usually reserved for relics or miracles. But with his awe came something sharper. Expectation. He wanted me to build it. The moral dilemma struck harder than any physical wound. If I constructed this device, I would cross a line even I had not dared to approach. It would mark me not simply as an asset, but as a collaborator, a being willing to assist in the creation of heresy. And yet, the potential was undeniable. I could stabilize their failing systems, protect my niece, maybe even ensure that the humans who had unexpectedly shown us moments of mercy would survive the threats hunting them in the void. Was survival worth corruption? Was knowledge worth damnation? Were intentions enough to justify creation? These questions gnawed at me for days. During that time, the crew began to show subtle signs of trust. They left small items at our doorway. Food, tools, blankets. Not offerings of worship, but gestures of gratitude. They did not speak to me directly, but their actions whispered what they were too afraid to voice. They wanted us to live. One night, after the lights dimmed into ship night, my niece curled against my side and slept with her head on my arm. The warmth of her breath, the small weight of her hand gripping my skin. It was an anchor in a world that threatened to strip away every shred of humanity I had left. I realized then that morality, like survival, was not a universal concept. It was personal, sometimes painfully so. If building the forbidden device meant protecting the only family I had left, then the choice had already been made. And yet there was gratitude too, a gentle, almost fragile gratitude that had begun to bloom between me and the Red Voice. He offered knowledge and opportunity, but more importantly, he offered respect. Not openly, not verbally, but through the small changes in his behavior. He handed me tools instead of dropping them. He waited for me to finish a task instead of interrupting. He watched with the intensity of a scholar, studying something sacred. One evening, he extended a mechanical arm toward me and placed a small engraving tool in my palm. An offering, a gesture. He bowed, not deeply, not theatrically, but enough to be unmistakable, and I understood. He was thanking me, not for obedience, not for servitude, but for the brilliance he could not replicate. With that acknowledgement, my doubts softened. I returned to the schematics, resolved in purpose. The lines no longer felt forbidden. They felt necessary. My hands moved faster, surer, guided by instinct and experience, weaving together a device that skirted the edge of impossibility. And in those moments, I understood a terrible truth. Knowledge is not inherently moral or immoral, but what one chooses to do with it defines everything. By the time the device's frame flickered with contained, stabilized power for the first time, I knew there was no going back. The path before me was set, not by faith, not by compulsion. By choice, the ship was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, too silent for the void. Only the hum of damaged engines and the distant creak of stressed hull plates reminded me that life continued here. But I knew better. Silence was never an idle state in this galaxy. It was a precursor, a warning. Hours passed with the skeleton crew tending to emergency systems, their chants blending with the soft clicks of servitors, maintaining essential life support. My cage door remained open, but I had no desire to leave. Observation was a form of preparation, a silent study of patterns, weaknesses, and the rhythm of this failing vessel. And then it came. A shudder ran through the hull, not from engines, not from artillery fire, but from something else entirely. The air thickened, a subtle vibration resonating through my bones, an unnatural pressure that made the hairs on my skin rise. The warp had bled through. Its signature was unmistakable. Chaotic, living, invasive. It sought the ship like a predator scenting its prey. The Giller field flickered. Immediate panic rippled through the crew. Servitors screamed in digital distress, chanting text psalms faster than any human tongue could follow. Priests scrambled along the corridors, invoking rites that no longer held the same sway. They were skilled and devout, but this was something beyond devotion, beyond ritual, something that would not be delayed by prayers or holy incantations. I stepped forward instinctively, the compulsion to act igniting before reason could intervene. My niece followed, small but unwavering, her paws gripping my fur as we moved. My mind raced over the layout of the ship, the known vulnerabilities, and the fragile stabilization sequences of the Geller field. Every sequence had a failure point, and every failure point could be catastrophic. The night could be catastrophic. The red voice arrived at the generator room, just as I had predicted. His optical sensors locked onto me, registering both surprise and relief. I ignored protocol and bypassed him, plunging my hands into the exposed core of the Geller field generator. Electricity danced along my skin, warp energy crackling like fire in my veins. It tried to resist, to rewrite reality around me, but my hands moved with knowledge older than the Imperium. A harmonic resonance had formed, destabilizing the field. The warp pushed back, probing for weaknesses, testing the vessel. I felt it inside me, a tugging at the base of my spine, a pull that was both physical and psychic. My mind and body merged with the task. I rerouted flows through circuits never intended to carry such power, creating feedback loops that countered the bleed of the warp. Every connection I made violated design protocols, but the field stabilized incrementally with each adjustment. The red voice muttered binary prayers, perhaps gratitude, perhaps fear. The vibrations of the warp pressed closer. I could see the Geller field flicker like a dying flame across the deck. One misrouted current, and we would all be consumed. But my hands did not falter. I could feel the old one's guidance, ancient instinct encoded in my blood, a memory of battles fought across eons. Minutes stretched into eternity. The warp thrashed against the barriers I reinforced, trying to tear reality apart. And yet, the field held. Finally, it stabilized. A hum of cold mechanical relief reverberated through the deck. Reality, solid and merciless, reasserted itself. The crew dared to exhale. The servitors paused their frantic movements. My niece, quiet beside me, looked up with wide, trusting eyes. The red voice approached slowly. His claws, once instruments of authority, now trembled with something close to reverence as he examined my hands, smoking and raw from the exposure. He did not scold. He did not restrain. He observed and recorded. His silence said more than any words ever could. He understood. He carried me back to the cage with care, placing me inside without locking the door. A gesture, subtle but loaded with meaning. Trust, recognition, respect. Acknowledgement that I had not acted out of compulsion or obedience, but initiative. That the choice to protect, to intervene, to stabilize had been mine, and mine alone. In the following days, the Inquisitor arrived. She stood before the open cage, her gaze sweeping over the stabilized systems, the humming Geller field, and finally, me. The weight of her judgment was immediate. But instead of condemnation, I sensed a shift, a recognition that the caged being she had underestimated was more than an asset, more than property, perhaps something approaching equal in intelligence, if not in station. She spoke to the red voice in words I could not comprehend, gestures precise and deliberate. When she finally addressed me, it was brief, acknowledging the success, the initiative, the preservation of lives that should have been lost. The message was clear. My choice mattered. My intervention had saved not just the vessel, but the lives aboard it. Even the crew, once silent observers, offered gestures of acknowledgement, small unspoken acts, a tool left within reach, a blanket folded neatly, a nod of silent gratitude. They could not understand fully, could not articulate the enormity of what had transpired, but recognition, however faint, had begun to form. And in that fragile acknowledgement, I felt a shift within myself. The line between compulsion and choice blurred, between service and autonomy, between property and something more. The warp had tested us. I had met its test. And in doing so, I had discovered that survival, initiative, and intelligence could carve meaning even from the teeth of inevitable death. Days passed after the warp breach, but the echoes of that encounter lingered like a pulse beneath the ship's hull. The Geller field hummed steadily now, stabilized by the work of hands that defied human comprehension. Yet, the silence between species, the chasm of unspoken understanding, remained. The red voice watched, studied, but there were limits to observation. Words could never bridge the divide between human minds and mine, not fully. Then he returned with something new. A small device no larger than the fist of a servitor, crafted with materials I recognized from archaic texts and fragments of lost archotech. The Voxcaster was not for sound, it was for thought. A translation matrix, capable of conveying concepts directly to consciousness, bypassing speech entirely. Its interface was alien, yet familiar in the language of instinct and deep understanding. I reached for it, trembling. The weight of months of silence, of being unheard and unseen, pressed into me. Activation was simple, a single touch, but what emerged was not sound. It was thought, concept, a presence inside my mind, a flow of information that conveyed not words, but meaning. Do you understand this? I thought back carefully, trying to compress the enormity of months into a response the device could transmit. Yes, I understand. I hear you. The red voice emitted a sound that was somewhere between relief and disbelief, a vibration of his throat augmented to carry emotion. His response came immediately, not in sound but in the same direct conceptual medium. I am sorry. We did not know. We could not hear you. And for the first time, I felt the weight of acknowledgement. Recognition not bound by language or hierarchy, but by comprehension. My experiences, my fears, my decisions, all of it could now be shared. We spoke for hours. Concepts of technology, of cognition, of purpose flowed freely between us. I could convey the methods of my modifications, the logic behind every heretical circuit I had rewired, the ancient instinct embedded in my DNA. In turn, he offered his insights, limitations, and understandings of machinery that humans had long codified but rarely questioned. Together we built not weapons, but a bridge of understanding. Through the device, I expressed the nuances of choice, not compulsion, not obedience, but the deliberate decision to act, to serve, to protect. I could explain the subtle distinctions between property and agency, between servitude and purposeful action. Concepts that had no words in any human tongue flowed across the translation matrix, and the red voice received them not merely as signals, but as comprehension. He paused at one point in what I understood as contemplation. His gestures, previously precise and mechanical, softened with a gesture that resembled thoughtfulness. What do you want? The question reached my mind not as sound, but as an invitation. Not command, not inquiry, but true choice. I thought of freedom fleeting and impossible, of my niece safe and growing beside me, of the galaxy beyond this vessel teeming with danger, chaos, and inevitability. We could vanish into the void, but what would we gain? Fear as constant companion, mistrust as sustenance. Distress, endless flight with no purpose. I want to help, I transmitted, but I want to be asked. I want choice. I want my family safe. I want recognition. The response came almost immediately, resonating directly in my consciousness. You will have these things. You will have these things. You have earned them. You have saved us. You will be valued, not just used. It was not freedom. It would never be freedom. But it was acknowledgement. It was respect. It was recognition that my actions carried weight and that my decisions could shape outcome. And that in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium was as close as one could come to victory. From that day, the device became an extension of myself. Through it, I could instruct, explain, and guide. I could teach the humans the ancient ways, the instinctual genius encoded in my being, and they could understand, or at least attempt to. The boundaries of language dissolved, replaced by shared purpose. The red voice, once a figure of authority and observation, became a collaborator. He brought others occasionally, humans curious or skeptical, and together we explored the limits of what could be conveyed. Mechanics, philosophy, ethics, and survival, all transmitted without misinterpretation, without the filter of flawed language. And my niece, she learned too, in her own way. Observing, experimenting, understanding the subtle currents of thought that flowed through the device, a bridge between species, between generations, between instincts and choice. Recognition had begun to grow, quietly, subtly, as a seed that could one day take root. And in the quiet moments between work, between repairs, between battles, I realized that the device offered something far more profound than simple communication. It offered understanding, the acknowledgement that intelligence, regardless of form or origin, deserved to be seen and heard. This was a new kind of service, not forced, not compelled, but chosen, not slavery, not captivity, but the deliberate application of skill, instinct, and purpose to protect, to repair, and to preserve. In this galaxy of endless war and incomprehensible darkness, it was the closest thing to meaning I had ever experienced. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, strange, unfamiliar, yet steadier than anything I'd known since we escaped the slums of the Underhive. The warp storm behind us faded into distant turbulence, and the ship pressed onward into the void. The translation matrix became a constant companion, its soft pulsing glow a reminder that understanding, real understanding, was now possible. Work became routine, though nothing on a Mechanicus vessel could ever truly be called ordinary. There were always systems failing on the edge of collapse, engines that whispered in code older than any living mind, conduits that rebelled against logic. I repaired what I could, instructed where needed, and guided where understanding faltered. Not because I was ordered, because I chose to. The red voice checked on me daily, though he no longer watched with suspicion. His presence held a quiet, steady respect now. Sometimes he brought data slates filled with schematics for machines even the Mechanicus feared to touch. Sometimes he simply asked questions about instinct, intuition, the strange paths my mind took to reach solutions. Humans relied on process. I relied on the raw logic wired into my blood. Together, these approaches created something neither of us could achieve alone. My niece spent most of her time near the engine decks where the hum of machinery soothed her. She learned faster than I expected. Her small hands, once trembling with fear, moved with growing confidence. She could align circuits with precision, sense irregularities before alarms detected them. Not inherited, not implanted, simply learned, absorbed from constant exposure to what the rest of the galaxy dared not understand. I often wondered what future she would claim in this grim, endless war. A child of no world, a student of instinct and machine, a being shaped by survival and brilliance both. She saw me not as something broken or dangerous, but as guidance, a protector, a constant. That alone anchored me more firmly than any chain or designation ever could. Quiet moments were few but precious. During breaks between repairs, I found myself looking out the observation ports, watching stars drift like silent witnesses. The galaxy stretched endlessly, its beauty hiding horrors that devoured civilizations whole. Freedom in such a place was impossible. Survival required allegiance, however flexible, however conditional, and yet I no longer felt like property. Not entirely. Recognition had begun to settle into the cracks of my existence like warmth in winter's cold. Humans nodded at me without fear now. Some even attempted conversation through the device, though their thoughts were clumsy, their concepts rigid. Still, the effort meant something. I realized with time that choosing to stay was less a concession and more a strategy. The ship offered stability, safety, a future for my niece. Opportunities for learning and guidance. I could shape her path, steer her away from the mistakes that nearly ended my own life. I could teach her the balance between obedience and comprehension, survival and purpose. But acceptance did not mean surrender. I kept a part of myself hidden, a quiet reserve of instinct and autonomy no device could translate and no human could claim. It was my safeguard, my anchor, my reminder that agency existed even in dark. Reflection often came late at night, when the ship dimmed its lights and the hum of the engines lulled half the crew to uneasy sleep. I would sit with the translation matrix in my hands, feeling its warmth, thinking of how drastically the galaxy had shifted with its creation. Communication had changed everything, not just survival, but identity. For once, my mind was not a prison, it was a bridge. There were still challenges. Some humans remained wary, their eyes following me with old prejudice. Their whispers carried words like a Hirtek and a mutant. Fear was not so easily erased, but the red voice stood between suspicion and silence, countering ignorance with understanding. His authority gave me space to exist without the threat of chains or purges. And that, in the Imperium, was a rare gift. Over time, the repairs became more efficient. Accidents decreased. Systems that had failed for years stabilized under our combined work. Whispers of praise spread, cautious but genuine. I was no longer a creature hiding in the shadows of ducts, dragging a child through forgotten corridors. I was part of the ship's living pulse. And with each passing day, I felt the galaxy's weight shift ever so slightly. Not enough to change fate, but enough to make breathing easier. Enough to let me imagine a future where survival wasn't the only purpose. Enough to consider that meaning, real meaning, could exist even in a place forged from suffering. Grim acceptance settled in not as defeat but as clarity. This ship was not freedom, but it was safety, stability, a place to build something that resembled life. And in the grim darkness of endless war, that was more than most ever received. The ship drifts through the void, its engines thrumming a low, constant heartbeat beneath the hull. Outside, the stars stretch into long streaks of light, distorted by the warp currents that cling to the vessel like a predator. Something has changed. The humans move with sharper attention, eyes flicking the corridors I traverse, hands brushing over weapons I have modified. Their gestures tentative but loaded with suspicion. They test me subtly in ways I recognize immediately. A medikey servo is left malfunctioning for hours longer than necessary, a section of the hull left unsealed to see whether I will intervene. Nothing is spoken. Their fear is a quiet pulse, a static charge in the air. And yet I move because I cannot help myself. Instinct, compulsion, duty, they are indistinguishable. I wander the ship's inner corridors, my niece trailing close behind, her small hands clutching the edges of metal railings as if to anchor herself in a reality that has little stability. Reality that has little stability. The humans observe her as well, curiosity interlaced with apprehension. She has learned quietly, through imitation and guided repetition, how to repair minor systems, how to anticipate the rhythms of machinery, how to understand the language of metal and power without needing words. She is growing into her own comprehension of the galaxy's cruelty, her innocence tempered by observation, her loyalty bound to me, and the small acts of survival we carve from the day. The tests continue. The Inquisitor passes near the cargo hold and watches me disassemble a series of old servitor components, her gaze weighing, analyzing, judging. I sense the question behind her expression. How far will you go? What are you capable of without command? Without the lock and the key? I move deliberately, ignoring the silent scrutiny. I know they are watching, and I also know they will not understand the limits of what I am. The spore inside me, the lessons encoded into my blood, the instincts older than the Imperium itself. All of it drives my hands with precision they cannot replicate. My niece watches, learning not just the mechanics, but the defiance and restraint, the quiet assertion of control in a galaxy that offers none. Night comes in the corridors, though night is meaningless here in the perpetual, artificial light of the ship. Systems hum, oxygen recirculates, the warp currents vibrate beneath the hull. I pause in the maintenance bay, feeling the ship like a living organism. There is tension in the structure, microfractures forming under stress, energy flows fluctuating with unseen intrusions. The humans are aware of this, and they watch me adjust, reroute, stabilize. Their reliance grows, as does their uncertainty. They fear the unknown within me, the intelligence they cannot name, the capability they cannot measure, and yet they cannot avoid it. Survival demands cooperation, and cooperation demands acknowledgement. Small acts of rebellion fill the hours. I leave a misaligned conduit slightly adjusted, so that a sensor reads a false negative, misleading human expectations. I place a component just slightly out of reach of a medikey servitor, forcing it to rely on observation rather than routine. I speak to my niece in gestures, teaching her efficiency in ways the humans do not notice, guiding her fingers over circuits so she understands more than she should. Each of these acts is minor, imperceptible to them individually, but together they form a network of influence, a subtle assertion of will against the invisible bars of our captivity. The ship itself becomes a canvas, and I paint upon it the quiet language of survival that is mine alone. They test me again. A warp probe is routed through the main power conduits, the signal corrupted, the field destabilized. The skeleton crew stands by, chanting prayers to the machine god, eyes darting between each other and me. I kneel beside the core, hands brushing over conduits, feeling the currents, sensing the feedback loops as though they were extensions of my own body. This is a test and I know it, but it does not matter. My choice is instinct, my action inevitable. I realign the flows, recalibrate the harmonic resonance, divert power to stabilizers they do not know exist. The field strengthens, the warp's intrusion falters, and the humans glance at one another with relief and disbelief. No words are spoken. The acknowledgement is there in the tilt of heads, the quickened steps, the silent prayers. I do not rejoice. There is only the work, and the understanding that we have survived another moment by my intervention. Time stretches, repetitive and quiet. Humans continue their routines. The Inquisitor passes less frequently. The skeleton crew's movements become more automatic, more dependent. And still, I move within the boundaries of observation, exercising the limited freedom I have. I modify, improve, instruct, and subtly redirect. My niece mimics me, and together we enact a rhythm of quiet rebellion, a chain of small freedoms within the cage. She brings components I ask for, arranges tools with understanding, and learns without words, her comprehension an echo of my own intelligence. This is our language, our network of influence and survival. I am observed but not restrained. I am tested but not harmed. The humans learn slowly that my choices are deliberate, that my agency persists even within confinement. There is fear in their acknowledgement, respect threaded with hesitation, and curiosity they dare not voice. And there is a pattern forming in their interactions. They adjust, adapt, rely on me in ways that gradually erode the simplicity of ownership. They recognize utility, and with recognition comes the faintest acknowledgement of intelligence. Not freedom, not equality, but a recognition of being beyond their classifications. The stars outside stretch into lines once more as the ship maneuvers toward its next destination. Threats await in the void. Rival fleets, remnants of chaos, the warp's ever-looming tendrils. But within the vessel, a quiet equilibrium has emerged. The cage remains, the locks remain, yet the space inside it has subtly shifted. I move within it as I choose, my niece learning beside me, the humans aware of my decisions, my intelligence, my capability. It is not triumph. It is survival tempered by control, a negotiation between fear and necessity. And it is enough to endure, enough to influence, enough to assert even the smallest measure of will in a galaxy that demands surrender. This is how we persist. Through observation, through intervention, through the cultivation of understanding that no words could convey. The humans may never fully grasp what it means to live intelligence constrained, yet active, yet choosing in defiance of their expectations. My niece sleeps beside me as I adjust a final conduit, a minor tweak that will prevent an accident no human has noticed. The act is trivial, yet deliberate. It is rebellion in miniature, the assertion of agency through work, through teaching, through being. And in this quiet space between observation and action, between cage and freedom, we endure. We endure because the galaxy offers no choice but survival, and survival demands intelligence, persistence, and the courage to act even when no one else understands. The alarms shatter the ship's habitual hum. Red lights flood the corridors, pulsing like the heartbeat of a wounded beast. I rise from the maintenance bay, my niece close behind, ears pressed to the walls as the vibrations of panic ripple through the hull. Something is approaching. Not a skimmer or shuttle, not another human craft, but something alien, something that does not follow known laws. The warp stirs outside, currents twisting unnaturally, and I feel it in the fibers beneath my skin. The spore inside me reacts, pulsing in resonance with the ship's tremors, a silent recognition that this is a danger our biology can perceive before human sensors even blink. The skeleton crew scrambles, voices lost in shouted orders, prayers, and the metallic clatter of servitors moving to defend the hull. The Inquisitor's figure appears briefly at the head of the corridor, eyes scanning, hand on a bolt pistol, but she does not intervene directly. She expects me to act. And I will. I always act. We move together toward the source of the disturbance. My niece's small hands clutch my arm, her breathing shallow but steady. I guide her through the twisting corridors, bypassing locked doors, rerouting security systems, manipulating power flows to mask our presence. The approaching entity is not one we can fight conventionally. The warp pulses against the ship, trying to pry open reality, seeking weaknesses in the hull, in the systems, in the minds of those who dwell inside. I reach the core control room first. The red voice is already there, servo arms working frantically to stabilize the failing conduits. He glances at me, binary prayers mingling with human words, eyes wide with recognition. It's more aggressive than predicted. I kneel, touching the exposed circuits, sensing the feedback like the beating of a living organism. The warp's intrusion is intelligent, probing, calculating, adapting. To survive, we must be faster, more precise, more deliberate than it anticipates. My hands move over the systems in a dance older than humanity, rerouting energy flows, recalibrating stabilizers, isolating unstable nodes. The spore inside me resonates with the currents, guiding me, warning me, compelling me to act. The hull shudders, violently. A section of the deck bends inward, metal screaming under the pressure. Servitors lurch to maintain balance. My niece falls to the floor and I catch her just in time. "Do not look away," I whisper, though I doubt she hears words the way humans do. She senses the intent, the direction of action, and she moves with me instinctively, carrying tools, holding lines, performing tiny acts that will ripple into survival. The warp entity strikes again, this time in a concentrated pulse aimed at the core. Lights flicker, energy arcs jump across conduits, and a low, almost sentient vibration passes through the floor beneath us. My hands work with lethal precision. I isolate the overcharged nodes, redirect the flux, and stabilize the harmonic resonance that binds the ship's systems. I feel the creature probing, testing, failing, retreating slightly, its intelligence confronted by something it cannot predict. Minutes stretch like hours. Sweat burns my eyes, veins throb beneath my skin, and still I do not pause. My niece watches, absorbing, learning. The red voice monitors, aiding where I cannot, but deferring to instinct. Together we become the axis around which survival pivots. The hull shudders again, but less violently. Though silently, the warp pulse retracts slightly, the entity hesitant now, uncertain of this resistance. Finally, the final conduit is adjusted, the harmonics stabilized, the ship's systems locked in perfect tension. The red voice exhales, servo arms relaxing, eyes filled with a recognition that no human voice could express. We survived. My niece clings to me, trembling, but safe. And I allow myself, for the briefest moment, the luxury of a thought that is mine alone. We acted because we chose to. Not commanded, not forced, but instinctual and deliberate. The Inquisitor enters moments later, her eyes scanning, calculating, understanding more than she allows herself to admit. She does not speak of heroism, nor does she praise. But in the slight nod, the almost imperceptible shift in posture, there is acknowledgement. She understands that what has been achieved here was beyond her control, beyond conventional comprehension. We have faced a force that defies the Imperium's doctrines and survived, not because of orders, not because of luck, but because of choice and instinct intertwined. The alarms die down, red lights dim to normal operational glow. Outside, the stars resume their indifferent stretch through the void. The warp stirs, still restless but cautious. The ship's systems hum in harmony again. My niece sits beside me, exhausted yet understanding, her small hands tracing the conduits as if memorizing them for later. The red voice remains near, silent but watchful, and I sit in the control room, breathing, waiting, knowing the galaxy will not grant another moment of peace, yet for now we endure. The corridors are quiet now, but the silence is heavy, like the weight of the void pressing against every wall. The crew murmurs in small clusters, repairing what they can, but the energy in the air is taut, electric with lingering dread. I move slowly, my niece at my side, her eyes scanning, alert despite exhaustion. The spore inside me thrums faintly, a reminder that my body is no longer entirely my own. It senses the residual warp energy, reacts to the fear and tension of those around us, and prepares silently, instinctively for the next threat. We reach the cargo hold and the remnants of the skirmish are evident. Burnt hull plating, singed wiring, the faint smell of ozone, and something fouler, biological, that I cannot name. Servitors limp along, their steps deliberate, voices lost in the cadence of maintenance protocols. The red voice follows, observing, noting, yet always deferring to my understanding of the systems. The Inquisitor stands at the center of the room, eyes sharp, scanning the damaged equipment. Her gaze finds me, and though she says nothing, I feel the weight of her calculations. She knows, as I do, that the attack was not merely an assault, it was a test. The warp entity probed, measured, and retreated only when confronted by something it could not predict. My combination of instinct, genetic compulsion, and deliberate choice. I kneel to inspect a power conduit, feeling the residual hum of the warp energy, its faint imprint in the metal. My hands trace the lines, reading the stress and fatigue as if they were muscle and bone. My niece watches, silent, learning. She is growing, adapting, her small hands already understanding tools and processes that are far beyond the capabilities of most human apprentices. She is, in small ways, becoming like me, a bridge between instinct and intellect, between survival and adaptation. The red voice approaches, servo arms adjusting, hands hovering near the conduit. "It will hold," he says in a tone I understand, though. The words themselves are mechanical and hollow. For now, there is caution in his posture, a recognition that nothing is permanent in a galaxy where reality itself can tear at the seams. I stand brushing soot from my fur and feel the weight of responsibility settle on me, like armor. Each repair I make, each device I improve, each system I stabilize is a tiny bulwark against the chaos that surrounds us. The Imperium does not care if we survive, if we endure, if we understand. Only that we function, only that we continue to serve. And yet, in the quiet moments between alarms and emergencies, I find fragments of meaning, small acts of choice and understanding that are mine alone. My niece tugs at my arm. I follow her gaze to a damaged crate, its contents exposed. Shattered components, tools bent beyond immediate repair, schematics scorched by residual warp fields. She is asking silently for instruction. I take a deep breath, feeling the spore inside me pulse in response, and I begin to show her, step by step, how to restore the components, how to read the residual energy, how to understand the balance between force and fragility. She listens, adapts, and begins to act. It is slow, painstaking, but effective. Hours pass like this, measured not by time, but by the rhythm of repair, by the pulse of the warp, by the careful attention of my niece and the red voice. The ship breathes with us, alive and fragile, held together by hands guided by instinct and intellect alike. And I realize yet again that this is my purpose. Not freedom, not recognition, not escape, but the quiet, constant act of survival, of service, of teaching, of shaping the chaos into something ordered, even if only temporarily. The Inquisitor passes again, her eyes catching mine. No words are exchanged, none are necessary. She understands in some fundamental way the choice I make every day, to remain, to endure, to serve not because I'm commanded, but because I can, because survival itself demands it, because my niece's life and the fragile lives of those around me depend on my decisions. And for a brief moment in the lingering hum of the repaired systems, the ship stable and alive, I allow myself to think that perhaps this is enough. Perhaps survival, purpose, and family are the only victories the galaxy will permit. Perhaps in the endless darkness, these small acts of defiance, of understanding, of creation, are the only forms of triumph that truly matter. The warp may wait, the Imperium may judge, the universe may seek to undo us, but for now, we endure. And enduring, in this galaxy of endless war and suffering, is victory enough. The alarms scream like a chorus of the damned, echoing through the hull. My hands twitch, already anticipating the systems I will need to stabilize before reality itself tears apart. The ship shudders beneath the strain of warp resonance, and I feel the spore inside me quiver in recognition, a predator scent, a warning pulse. My niece clings to me, eyes wide, but she does not cry. She knows, instinctively, that I will guide her through what comes next. The skeleton crew scrambles, barely coordinated, their panic a fragile barrier against chaos. Servitors whirl, their mechanical limbs whipping in organized frenzy, but even their precision cannot match the unpredictability of the warp entity testing our defenses. I push past them, ignoring orders, ignoring the risk. My hands know the conduits, the bypasses, the weak points. I feel the flow of energy, both technological and unnatural, threading through the ship's veins like blood, and I move to manipulate it. The red voice follows, his servo arms adjusting to aid, but never directing. He has learned over months of observation that I am not a tool to command, but a mind to trust. Together we navigate the pulsating systems, merging instinct and intellect, human logic and Xenos precision. Through the trembling hull plating, I perceive the faint shimmer of something unnatural, a ripple in reality, like oil on water, signaling the presence of the warp's emissary. It twists, contorts, a shape too alien to register properly, but my mind knows it must be countered. I direct energy flows, reroute power through damaged shielding, and weave the remnants of the Geller field into a fragile lattice. My niece hands me components as I gesture, her small fingers precise, her understanding growing. The warp entity lashes out, striking the ship with tendrils of raw reality. The hull screams under the strain. Systems overload, sparks fly, and the smell of ozone mixes with the faint metallic tang of blood and fear. I feel the spore react violently inside me, as if it senses my awareness of the threat. It is not merely growing, it is anticipating, adapting, learning in tandem with my mind. Hours, or minutes, time is fractured. pass in a blur of coordination, adaptation, and raw instinct. I pushed the systems beyond their intended limits, bypassing safety protocols that would have killed lesser technicians instantly. The ship shudders again, and I feel the delicate threads of reality stretching thin. Yet through the chaos, the lattice holds. The warp entity recoils, its impossible geometry unable to breach the defenses we have wrought. When the last tendril retracts, leaving only the faint echo of its presence, the silence is deafening. My body trembles from exertion and residual warp feedback. The red voice kneels beside me, his mechanical hands checking vitals, ensuring I am unharmed. His expression, if it can be called that, a mixture of relief and awe. My niece watches silently, her small chest heaving with exhaustion and triumph. I sit back, breathing heavily, and survey the damage. The ship is scarred but intact, alive but wounded. Systems will need repair, components replaced, conduits rewired, but the immediate threat is gone. And in that moment, I understand the fragile truth. Survival is not merely a passive state. It is a constant act of creation, of adaptation, of dominance over forces that seek only to erase all life. The Inquisitor arrives shortly after, her eyes sharp, reading the scene. She does not speak, but her gaze carries recognition. Perhaps not understanding, perhaps not empathy, but acknowledgement. She has seen what I am capable of, what I have endured, and what I choose to do. Not because I am commanded, not because I am property, but because I will. And for the first time since my capture, I allow myself a brief, terrible satisfaction. I am necessary, not to survive, not to be useful, but because my presence, my decisions, my hands have turned the tide against forces that even the Imperium fears. The spore inside me pulses quietly, no longer merely infection, but a partner, a living instrument amplifying my instinct and will. I return to my cage, door open by choice, my niece following. We sit amidst the wreckage, silent, listening to the ship's slow heartbeat, the groan of metal and machinery. The galaxy outside remains indifferent, vast, and full of horrors. Yet in this fragile bubble, I find a semblance of control, a fleeting victory, a reminder that even in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, intelligence, instinct, and choice can carve survival from annihilation. And as night falls over the ship, I allow myself a single private thought. The war is endless, the enemies innumerable, the universe cruel beyond comprehension. But here, in this moment, we endure. And enduring in this galaxy is enough. The day begins with the hum of machinery, a fragile rhythm holding back the void. I rise from the metal floor of my cage, my niece already awake and at work, her small hands carefully assembling a rudimentary tool from scraps the acolyte brought. She glances up at me, her eyes reflecting curiosity, determination, and the faintest trace of trust that she has never offered to anyone else in this place. I nod, and she returns to her work. The red voice enters quietly, bringing components and supplies for the repairs and modifications I will oversee today. He observes without comment, his presence a silent acknowledgement that I am more than property, that my decisions carry weight. Together we move through the corridors, gathering damaged systems, reviewing structural weaknesses, and planning our next interventions. Every step is deliberate, measured, yet instinctual. I know the ship is intimately embodied. Hours pass in the fugue state of work. My hands move with precision, cannibalizing what is broken to strengthen what must survive. I watch my niece mirror my motions, her movements awkward but improving, learning not by instruction, but by observation and imitation. I realize she is becoming more than a passive observer. She is becoming a participant, a continuation of the skills and instincts that are coded into my very being. The ship quivers under minor warp disturbances, subtle reminders that the universe outside does not pause for recovery. Sensors report minor breaches in the outer hull, small, almost insignificant, but I know better. Every fracture is a potential doorway for horrors that do not respect human definitions of order. I repair, reinforce, and optimize, teaching my niece through gesture and demonstration. No words are needed. The lessons are encoded in action. Later, I retreat to my cage, pressing the button to close the door behind me, though it is not locked. The choice is mine. Sitting beside my niece, I reflect on the months we have endured. Isolation, captivity, the constant tension between survival and servitude. These have shaped us, forged us into instruments of creation as much as tools of destruction. I mourn what was lost, the freedom I will never regain, but I recognize the meaning in what remains. Survival is not merely living. It is the deliberate act of shaping reality, of imposing order on chaos, of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The Inquisitor visits again, her gaze scanning our work, assessing the improvements and innovations we have made. There is no outward acknowledgement, no praise, only scrutiny and calculation. Yet in her silence, I sense recognition, a grudging acceptance that we are more than she expected, more than she allowed herself to anticipate. And in that there is power not mine to wield, but mine to claim quietly through continued action. As night falls, I sit beside my niece, watching her experiment with a small mechanical construct. It is crude, inefficient, but hers entirely. I offer subtle guidance, showing her how to reinforce joints, balance weights, and optimize movement without touching the creation. She smiles faintly, a rare expression of satisfaction and pride. In this moment, I understand something fundamental. Survival is not only about endurance, it is about continuity, passing knowledge and finding family and purpose even in the most hostile environments. The ship hums around us, a living organism breathing slowly but steadily. I close my eyes for a brief moment, feeling the spore inside me pulse in quiet recognition of our shared vigilance. The universe outside remains indifferent, infinite. Yet within this cage, this fragile microcosm, we have carved a semblance of control, a fragile sanctuary from the endless horrors that lurk in the void. And in that fragile control, I find a grim satisfaction. Life persists, knowledge continues, and purpose, however cruelly assigned, is ours to exercise. We endure, we build, we survive, and in the 41st millennium, enduring is the most heroic act of all. The alarm scream in fractured bursts, more urgent than any previous disturbances. I am already awake, hands itching for action, senses attuned to the vibrations of the ship and the subtle shifts in warp energy that betray the presence of something unnatural. My niece stirs, her eyes wide with fear, but I gesture for her to stay close yet still. We have trained for moments like this. Though nothing truly prepares one for the raw, incomprehensible malevolence that now presses against the hull. The red voice is already at the generator room, hands moving with efficient precision, but even he is constrained by the skeleton crew's limited numbers. The warp energy bleeding into real space is massive, far beyond anything we've encountered before. My mind, my body responds instinctively. I step out of the cage, pressing the button so it opens behind me, and move through corridors I know better than my own pulse. Every deck, every junction, every shadow is familiar. My niece follows without hesitation, a small bundle of trust and instinct wrapped in fur and fear. The Guller field flickers violently, threatening to collapse entirely. Servitors rush past, chanting in binary prayers, oblivious to the subtle, precise corrections required to stabilize the system. I plunge my hands into the exposed core, feeling the warp energy lash against my skin. Pain and alien sensation, electricity and malevolence flood my senses. I ignore it, guided by instincts older than humanity, memories older than civilization, genetic programming that demands survival through creation. I sense the problem immediately. Harmonic interference loops amplifying the warp bleed instead of damping it. Conventional solutions will fail. Safety protocols are irrelevant. Failure to act means death for everyone aboard. I begin rewiring, rerouting, synthesizing pathways that should not function, but do because my mind operates in the resonance of the old one. My niece hands me components as I gesture, her small fingers trembling but steady, her trust absolute. Together we weave the improvised architecture of survival. Minutes stretch like hours. The warp presses, probing, seeking weaknesses. The ship shudders violently, throwing us against walls and machinery. The red voice assists where he can, his presence steadying, his optical sensors reflecting awe, fear, and respect. He is witnessing something beyond comprehension, a being humans considered property orchestrating life and survival with intuition and genius they cannot hope to match. Finally, with a surge of energy that hums through the corridors and reverberates through metal and flesh alike, the Geller field stabilizes. The war proceeds, drawn back into the Imperium, screaming in rejection of the order imposed by my hands. Silence falls, thick and trembling. The ship quivers as if catching its breath, alive again. I collapse against the generator, muscles trembling, hands smoking from residual energy, body soaked in sweat and adrenaline. My niece curls against me, silent but alive, heart beating fast but steady. The red voice approaches slowly, kneeling beside me. He examines the core systems, adjusts minor calibrations, and looks at me with eyes that seem to question the very definitions of intelligence and loyalty. No words pass, yet acknowledgement flows in every careful movement, every pause, every tilt of his mechanical head. We have survived, not by orders, not by protocol, but by instinct, skill, and the silent symbiotic trust between us. Hours later, the Inquisitor returns, surveying the ship and its crew. Her gaze falls on us in the generator room. She does not speak immediately. She studies, calculates, considers. And then she steps forward, kneeling beside the cage with my niece and me inside. For the first time, her posture is one of humility, her voice low, carrying the weight of recognition. Though she cannot know fully what it means to be caged yet free in choice, she acknowledges it in her actions. The red voice activates the communication device and thought flows freely between us. I convey the intricacies of what was done, the improvisations, the latent dangers, and the subtle warnings for the future. Knowledge exchanges silently, instantly, bridging species and understanding in a way language could never achieve. The Inquisitor listens, absorbs, and nods. Recognition has been given. Trust, hard-won and earned, now exists in the space between us. I retreat to my cage as always, pressing the button to close it behind me. My niece settles beside me, and I examine the ship systems, noting small flaws, minor inefficiencies, potential vulnerabilities for the future. I work quietly, not because I must, but because I choose to. The universe remains hostile, indifferent, and merciless. Yet within this fragile cage, amidst the fragile constructs of survival, we have carved meaning, purpose, and agency. The warp will come again, threats will rise, and horrors beyond comprehension will seek entry. But for now, we endure. In enduring, we assert our existence, our intelligence, our will. I am property, yet I am essential. I am trapped, yet I am the difference between life and annihilation. I am what the old ones designed, what the Imperium failed to understand, what my niece depends upon. And that is enough to survive another day. Morning in the cage. Observing the quiet routines, the ship humming with life, the gentle presence of family. Value in service, recognizing how every act of building, repairing, or saving lives creates meaning. Memory and mourning, remembering lost family, freedom, and what has been sacrificed. Communication and recognition, reflecting on thought-based communication, understanding across species, and the acknowledgement of intelligence, acceptance and purpose. Embracing the paradox of captivity and voluntary service, finding victory in survival. Looking ahead, contemplating future challenges, remaining vigilant, and finding small victories in a universe of endless war. Morning comes, not with light, but with the subtle hum of the ship's engines. The Geller field vibrates softly beneath my paws, a shield against horrors the humans will never see, against chaos that would consume us all if it slipped a fraction of an instant. The cage is quiet now, the air thick with the smell of recycled metal, waxed floors, and something faintly sweet. Fruit, left carefully beside my niece. She stirs, yawning, curling her small body closer. I groom her, removing the tangles, the traces of sleep and captivity, smoothing her fur with motions as old as memory itself. It is a ritual, a signal. We are here together, alive. The button rests under my paw, untouched. The cage door could open, and I could leave. But the choice no longer feels like a burden. Freedom is an illusion, a concept. Each day brings broken machines, shattered weapons, failing shields. And each day I restore them, I improve them, I make them sing. And in that work the galaxy itself bends, if only for moments, to obey me. I remember my first day outside the cage, the moment I chose to act rather than flee. The skeleton crew scattered in panic, warp energy tearing at reality, the ship groaning like a living thing. I moved, guided by instincts older than the Imperium, older than human memory, and I fixed what humans could not even comprehend. They survived because I built, because I chose to serve. That choice was mine, and it was enough. Now, even in this small metal prison, I feel the weight of that responsibility. It is heavy, comforting, necessary. I watch the humans as they move through the corridors, carrying tools, checking systems, bringing scraps for me to transform into something more than their parts. They do not understand what I do, will never fully see the depth of knowledge and instinct trapped behind my face. But they try in their awkward, fumbling ways. The young acolyte, The one who brought my niece her small puzzles and toys pauses at the edge of the cage sometimes, eyes wide with something between fear and awe. I give him small nods, small gestures. He brings scraps that fascinate me, and I return them improved, more elegant than he imagined possible. Each exchange is a bridge, a silent acknowledgement of intelligence beyond form. I think about the red voice. He moves through the ship with the precision of a machine, but carries the weight of understanding now. His gestures, his care, the way he leaves the cage door open but does not force it closed. These are his words to me. We communicate through concepts, through thought translated into machine and mind. I tell him what I am, what I know, what I feel, and he listens. And in that listening, something shifts. Recognition, respect, something fragile and real that no chains, no locks, no labels of property can erase. I mourn freedom, of course. The memory of days spent on a drifting vessel with my brother, the ease of movement, the vast emptiness of space untouched by war haunts me. I mourn the life we lost when the warehouse ended it, when cages replaced choice. I mourn it with every tool I touch, every weapon I rebuild. And yet I have learned to carry that mourning alongside purpose. They do not cancel each other. They coexist, layered, complex, like the minds of humans who will never truly see me. The universe outside is unchanged. The stars burn in their cruel, indifferent silence. Planets spin, empires rise and fall, gods laugh at mortal suffering. And yet, here in this small corner of the void, I endure. I endure because the work matters. I endure because my niece sleeps beside me, safe. I endure because every machine I restore, every shield I strengthen, every weapon I perfect is a stand against the darkness. Survival itself is the victory. I press the button and open the cage. The metal groans, the sound familiar and comforting. My niece's eyes flutter open, following me with unwavering trust. Together we step into the cargo hold. The hum of machinery, the flicker of lights, the quiet diligence of humans. It is a ritual as sacred as any prayer. I do not speak. I do not need to. They watch, sometimes with fear, sometimes with gratitude, sometimes with something else I cannot name. And I move, hands guided by instinct, mind guided by understanding. Even now, I feel the old one's memory coursing through me, the ancient compulsion to build, to repair, to serve. It is genetic absolute. But now it is also chosen. I am no longer merely a tool. I am a participant, a thinker, a guardian of fragile lives in a galaxy that wishes them dead. I can choose to act, to save, to create, and in that choice there is meaning. Not freedom, not peace, not victory over the galaxy, but enough. Enough to endure, enough to teach, enough to leave a trace of purpose behind me. Evenings come and go. Time is measured in completed modifications, repaired systems, small victories over entropy. My niece grows, learns, and teaches in ways humans cannot comprehend. I watch her, patient, guiding with gestures, corrections, encouragement. She is family, and family is everything. Bonds built through touch, through care, through shared effort. The cage surrounds us, yes, but it does not imprison the mind. It does not limit what we can become within these walls. I reflect on morality sometimes, though the questions are abstract, unattainable. I have committed acts humans would label heretical, yet necessary. I have saved lives by enabling forbidden knowledge, by bending sacred technology to my will. The Imperium would never forgive such transgressions, but the universe does not judge by canon. It judges by survival, by consequence, by results. And in the quiet, I can see it. I am necessary. Not for freedom, not for justice, but for life itself. I return to the cage at night, pressing the button to lock the door myself. It is a gesture of control, a reminder that even in captivity, I have joy. I groom my niece smoother fur, whisper patterns of sound and motion she cannot understand but recognizes nonetheless. I close my eyes. The ship continues its journey, warp drive humming, shields glowing, engine steady. Outside, the galaxy burns. A chaos waits beyond the hull, and yet we endure. This is my life, horrible, constrained, unacknowledged, but also full, purposeful, necessary. I am property, yes, but I am also protector, teacher, builder. I am a survivor in the endless night. And though freedom may never come, recognition, choice, and the small, trembling warmth of family are enough to give my existence weight. Enough to endure, enough to be,